Hey guys, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. We are looking at Dizo, Cabal Chairman, the new promo that was just released this morning, Monday, the 19th of March. And it's a pretty exciting card. We played a little bit with it so far. The one of is never really a good indicator of what Dizo looks like in an actual deck, but we managed to play a couple of games with him and have some fun with him, and he's a delightful time, and so it works out pretty well. So, but yeah, we're gonna go ahead and talk about him. He is a 6-cost, 2 Shadow Influence 4/6 with Unblockable and Summon. You may sacrifice another unit to create and draw Cabal Extortion Scheme. And Cabal Extortion Scheme is a 3-cost spell that whenever the enemy player, when you target it, or you don't target it at all, actually you just play it, the enemy player must choose. You either get to draw the top 3 cards of the enemy player's deck, or you deal 7 damage to the enemy player and gain 7 health. So there's a lot of interesting things to break down about this card that make it very, very hard to evaluate in terms of a vacuum. The main things about Dizo are that he is very awkward in a couple of different ways that make him somewhat harder to play than a lot of other cards of that nature. But that's actually pretty much the nature of most of the promo cards that we've seen. There are a couple of promo cards that are very meta shifting, and then there are some that are specifically designed to make really interesting decks and sort of be a puzzle to solve. I think Dizo is in the realm of very powerful cards. Obviously, you do have to build decks around Dizo for 2 reasons. 1, Dizo is a 6-cost 4/6, which is not a great stat line. 2, Dizo's summon ability gives a modal choice to your opponent. And modal choices for opponents are generally a little weaker than they often seem. And this is the other thing that makes it somewhat hard to evaluate with the card. Because your opponent is always going to pick the thing that's least bad for them, sometimes it's not always going to be all that big a deal. That being said, this is a really well-designed modal card with a lot of power to it. It actually gives you a full 7 damage plus 7 health, and the 7 health is actually a really, really important thing to that swing, because it means that you are generally dealing enough damage to really stabilize against any type of aggro setup, and also to force your opponent into a very, very scary clock, which Dizo helps with because he is unblockable. So taking damage may not be in your opponent's best interest, and your opponent may have to decide to give you 3 cards. Paying 3 for 3 cards off the top of your opponent's deck is actually super good. That is actually really, really good value. Sometimes the cards won't be perfect for you, but I would say that it is absolutely worth it. It's a very, very efficient card for that particular setup. So Dizo on turn 6 doesn't do much, but he does give you another card, so he's essentially free. And on turn 7, Cabal Extortion Scheme can be played with something else, and the modal effect is powerful enough that it actually does matter. So both of those things are pretty good. But Dizo has that sacrifice problem where he actually needs to eat another unit, so you have to play him in a deck that is at least capable of sacrificing little flunkies so that you can get Cabal Extortion Scheme in the first place. And then also, Cabal Extortion Scheme does not end the game or win the game by any means. It will give you card advantage, but it won't kill your opponent because your opponent will never choose to take lethal damage, except in those situations where they already feel that they have completely lost, and Cabal Extortion Scheme is just like the icing on the cake. So those are the main problems with Dizo. That being said, he's actually quite powerful. I would say that a 4/6 unblockable is one of the best unblockable statted units that we have seen. There are currently 2 really playable unblockable units. One of them is Bartholo the Seducer, who is a 4-cost 2/2 with an Aegis on him, which makes him very, very good for carrying weapons. And the other one is Dizo, who is a 4/6. He's very, very hard to kill with most types of burn damage or direct damage. He's got a decent enough attack that he is actually capable of generating some level of pressure on your opponent, and the Cabal Extortion Scheme that you get as a bonus is actually really, really solid. So all of these things make Dizo a pretty reasonable mid-range unblockable unit who is always going to pressure your opponent, absolutely has to be answered because he will kill your opponent, and therefore allows you to take control of games where you essentially play him down. So since Dizo is a way to end the game, that dramatically increases his value as a 6-drop. Once you're into 6-drops, you really need to be looking for cards that can in some way win the game. Even if it's a small thing, like just having unblockability, that's a very, very big deal. Black Sky Harbinger would be a much worse card if it didn't have flying. Anything that can actually do a very, very large effect still has to have some way to push through at this cost, and Dizo has that ability. So overall, I am pretty impressed with this card. I think that there are quite a few different decks that he belongs in. and I'm most interested in seeing him in Feln decks with some degree of interesting sacrifice targets. The specific ones that are really good, I think, for Dizo are Haunting Scream style decks, because those are the decks where you get lots of units that you can already sacrifice anyways, so there's the potential there to actually get free stuff back and use Dizo to basically just eat those things later on in the game, which is kind of nice if you're trying to do like sort of heavy type value. Pretty hard to get both Haunting Scream and Dizo out though, so this is probably around the lower end of decks that you can build that are interesting. The deck that we have been playing with has been Argent Port, playing with Dizo, Cabal Chairman, and just playing with some Dark Wisps and a bunch of unblockable units, and then we're splashing in a Divining Rod for it. We'll show that off at the end of the stream. That one's pretty fun and seems to be just fine as far as things go, fairly average. Where Dizo most begins to shine is in Stone Scar decks, where you often have a lot of interesting things to sacrifice. There's cards like Bait and Grenadins and all of the special Grenadins that have Entomb effects. There's plenty of cards with Entomb effects like Dark Wisp. You can also do some stuff with him in Xenon decks where Champion of Mystery reigns, and where you have access to Ephemeral Wisp and Dawnwalker and all of the cards that come back from the Void and thus make really, really good sacrifice targets. Dizo's pretty cool in sort of the Xenon killer type setup, just because he's another good way to end the game at 6, and that's really, really decent if you want to set that up. But I think Stone Scar is probably the place where he most belongs. He's really interesting if you can get him out early with cards like Combustion Cell. Any type of like sort of Brimstone Altar, Combustion Cell, like weird deck that's doing a lot of things with Grenadin can actually have some fun with Dizo and like really have a pretty good time. I'd say that in straight Grenadin, he's probably not the best, just because like there are a lot of things in straight Grenadin that are very, very good about straight Grenadin, and like this card is more to enable other types of sacrifice strategies. But like with straight Grenadin, you've already got your Stone Scar Scrappers, you've already got your Gear Crunchers at the top, so you've got most of your win cons, and Dizo's not necessarily doing everything that he needs to help that deck out. But nonetheless, like, Stone Scar Sacrifice is definitely where Dizo's most interesting, I would say. Argent Port and Feln both have, like, maybe one deck that you can play him in that is really, really interesting, and if you can find that deck, then you can probably seize control of the ladder for a little bit and have some fun with it. And Xenon, I think, has basically just a fairly solid reason to play him for good stuff. My impression of him overall is that he's a little bit above average for a promo card. He's still very awkward and thus not likely to see a lot of play, but the decks that he is going to see play in should be pretty solid. So we'll see if he is any good at all. I could certainly be wrong. He might be just too awkward to play entirely, or people might not be experimentative enough to find the deck that he most belongs in. But there's enough good things going on with this card in terms of both the power of Cabal Extortion Scheme and the flexibility of having an unblockable unit that is actually quite beefy that Dizo should be fun to play around with and brew with. So let's go to the deck that we are currently looking at and just building around with. This is still very much in the early stages. We've played around with it. It's broken even, I think, so far. Had a pretty good streak and then had a couple of losses, and have continued to sort of mess around with it. And it needs more Dizos at the very least. But we'll show it off here. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch to the thing. There we go. And also, now you can see my chat. Hello, chat. So this is Unblock a Book. I'm not sure if the book even belongs in here, but we are fiddling with this so far. This current Dizo list is using Divining Rod to pop out unblockable units, because we now finally have a critical mass of unblockable units that are actually decent. You got Bartholo the Seducer, you got Champion of Mystery, you have Unseen Agent, and we now have Dizo Cabal Chairman, who's going to be up to 4. You can play a couple more unblockable units in here. Lethrai, there's a Lethrai Nightblade, the 3-cost 2/2 also adds pretty well to that. And so with that in, you might be able to actually get the Divining Rods up to a reasonable amount, and we can actually do some fun things with the Divining Rod. But for the moment, we're just running 2 of them as sort of a fun of, and we're also running them specifically so that we can splash time for Stand Together, which is a lovely card in any sort of Aegis-based deck. Okay, so basic idea behind this, of course, is we have cards like Oathbook, and we are just building weapons onto unblockable units. Bartholo the Seducer is very, very standard at this. It's really, really good for doing exactly this kind of stuff. We use Dark Wisps and Devours and Unseen Agents as cannon fodder for Dizo Cabal Chairman, who of course, currently a one of in the deck. And at the top, we are currently running Leave a Witness because I'm seeing a lot of like really big stuff like Praxis and Xenon, and that's a little bit harder to deal with when you're running an Aegis-based deck. So we want to have some way to stabilize the board and give our one big unit with Unblockable a way to survive and do a lot of nasty stuff. Yeah, so the deck has a really fun gunslinger theme where we are using Stella Shot Caller to give all of our gunslingers +1/+1 bonuses. Champion of Mystery is in fact a gunslinger, so that's like one cute little bonus that you get, but we've also got Bartholo, who's a gunslinger, Stonepatter Alchemist, who's a great cannon fodder for Dizo and is also a gunslinger, and yeah, just a decent amount of weapons as well. Lethrai Falchion and Bloodletter and Divining Rod all get benefits from Stella, so we get a pretty cool deck together out of that. So tweak with the numbers a little bit on this one, and I think this might be a really fun deck to play around with and have some fun with. And that's the basic idea around that. So yeah, we will certainly be testing this deck a little bit more as time goes on. Yeah, and I think that Scott M here has a point that we can talk about the flavor behind Dizo a little bit before we call it a night. So, what we know about Dizo, Cabal Chairman, is that he is sort of the shadowy leader behind the Cabal, and we don't actually know too much about the Cabal at the moment, except, well, you know, what they have done. So, when Roland takes control of Argenport in the Empty Throne, he makes a deal with the Cabal to essentially provide him with soldiers and support to keep the rebellion at bay and restore order to Argenport, but, of course, at the cost of just sort of not paying attention to whatever it is that they're doing. So he basically gets the Cabal to run free and become like sort of the power behind the throne, while at the same time allowing him to keep stability in the city. Dizo is the leader of these guys, and these guys have recently thrown Roland in jail, and all of the events of Dead Reckoning that you see with Roland are a result of that kind of stuff happening. You can look at cards like Devastating Setback and Solitude to see some of the minor like plot beats there. But as to what Dizo's overall goal is, we don't really know. I'm starting to suspect that they're allied with like Xenon shenanigans and other cool things. Like it's quite possible that they have ulterior motives. The Cabal seems to be up to just all sorts of interesting things, and we'll see if it's anything more than basic crime or what all is going on with Argenport now that the Cabal is so much in charge. However, Eileen, of course, being the new lady in charge, things might change dramatically from here on out. So we'll really see what's happening with Dizo in the next couple of sets, and perhaps we will see some more fun stuff with the Cabal. I'm really interested to see a little more exploration of the Cabal in general, because they are a shadowy organization that currently exists just to be shadowy. And although taking control of the throne is certainly a high ambition, they are clearly a very well-organized mafia-type organization. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's it for the card breakdown. I think we've covered everything. We got a good idea of where the deck lies. We have a fun deck to play, and yeah, I think that the card is reasonably powerful, kind of flavorful and interesting. Everything you want out of a promo card, something fun to play with for the next month or so while we wait for whatever the next fun event is. And yeah, should be great times. Happy brewing to all of you, and I will see all of you YouTubers next time. Have a really good night.